I'm tickled pink to be here. I don't think I've been to the RAF Museum since probably the 1970s with my dad. I'm a pilot's daughter, as I'm sure many of us in this room are. And I grew up in a house surrounded by aeroplanes. There are aeroplanes on the walls, paintings like the lovely paintings here. My brother and I religiously made airfix models. My dad had books, he collected books, photo albums, and then on the television in those days, in the 60s and 70s, there were all those wonderful films, Reach for the Sky, about Douglas Bader, or The Great Escape, or all the series that were on as well, Cadets, or the series Wings about the First World War. And it was aeroplanes, aeroplanes, aeroplanes when I was growing up. And I think the thing about childhood is that when you're a child, you don't actually know anything different, and you don't think your childhood is in any way that different to anyone else's, or you don't think it's unusual. And it's only maybe when you get older that you realise that it is. So that was really how I grew up. My dad didn't talk much. I was talking to a couple of other people here. He didn't really talk that much. I don't think because he was in any way not wanting to talk about it, but occasionally he'd come out with a tale about his experiences, and he told us a little bit about Falcon Field, and of course I saw his photos. And I think some of that must have stuck, because it was 1995, I just met my now husband, and we did a little road trip, and we went out to the USA, and we drove around California, and we went to Las Vegas, and we did all those things. And I said to my boyfriend at the time, I'd really like to go to this place called Falcon Field and have a look at it, because that's where my dad learned to fly. And so we went down there, and the swimming pool was still there in 1995. So I have got a photo of me by the swimming pool, and the famous fireplace was there, of course, still there. And at that time it was a museum. I can't remember the name of the museum now, but you know, some of the planes were obviously still there. But it was just fascinating to stand among these palm trees and everything else and see where my dad actually trained. And unfortunately, life takes its turns, and my dad, who was at that point in happy retirement, unfortunately, a few years later, he died suddenly, and he'd wanted to write his memoirs, and he's never really got round to doing it, and he was too busy doing stuff. I mean, he was the kind of chap who he was in the Falcon Field Association, but he never really went to any of the reunions or any of that. He was always a guy who was too busy doing things in the present, if that makes any sense. He would say, oh, leave the past in the past. We don't want to drag that up again. So it wasn't that he didn't want to see people, it was just that he was too busy doing other things. And then, a few years after he died, my mum said to me, well, he did always want to write his memoirs. You can write a bit, why don't you have a go at it? And so what I did was I dug out various bits and pieces. I found this. This is his first logbook. And it's actually from the Royal Canadian Air Force. I don't know if you gentlemen had that one as well, or whether you had a Royal Air Force one, I'm not sure. Yeah, because you landed at Moncton, I suppose, and it was better to have that, or maybe cheaper than sending the RAF ones over. And he was on course 24, and the first date in here is November 1944. And he flew in Stearman with Mr. Gladney. I don't know if he rings a bell to anyone. It's all in a very kind of neat schoolboy I found his logbook and all the photos. I've got, I'll leave all these out if anyone wants to go and have a look at them. I've got a little book here of his photos, some of them, and I'm sure that the gentleman here will recognise some of these. I think some of these incidents, we've got the train, I think there was one of the Yellow Peril, the bus, and various photos, so I'll leave those out as well. And I got in touch with some of his old chums who were still going at that point, and I just put together for family and friends a very kind of short, simple kind of biography about my dad, and I'll leave that out as well if anyone wants to have a look. And that could have been the end of the story, but I've got a son who's now a kind of strapping young thing of 22 and about that tall and about that broad. And he was born just 3 weeks before my dad passed away. So it was very sad, but at least my dad knew he had a grandson, although he never actually saw him. And around about the time I was writing this biography, my son was about 6, and he started asking me questions. He said, oh, you know, what are you doing? What was my granddad like? And it was this, what was my granddad like? And I thought, that's actually interesting, because I had this childhood surrounded by aeroplanes, and my son has had a very different childhood so far. And it occurred to me that what might have seemed a normal childhood for me was very unusual maybe for a child of the next generation, in that he was born in 2000. So he is a 21st century boy, and I thought, this boy's growing up with all the electronic games and all the new technology, and aeroplanes as well. Aircraft are very, very different. I say these days, you know, all the pilots are on automatic, and what would it be like for a boy from the 21st century to go back to the time when the pilots weren't on automatic, when everything was analogue, where there was no kind of play again. And this idea kind of came into my mind about, well, that would be quite a good idea for a children's adventure story. Because you could have a 21st century boy who children of today would identify with, and he'd be thrown into this kind of strange analogue world. And so that was the idea, and I started writing, and I thought, oh yes, I can use all the experiences my dad had, because he had a very long career in the Air Force. He was in the Air Force, including his work as a retired officer, for 42 years. Was it 42 years? I made some notes somewhere. I may have got that wrong. We're in different numbers. What was it? No, sorry, 47 years. 47 years. And he had, he flew 28 different types of aircraft. And what would it be like for this boy to go back and have an adventure in those kind of times? So I took a little bit of poetic license with it all, but it was all based on my dad's own kind of tales he told and his experiences. And the first book, because my dad, after Falcon Field, he came back, he stayed in the Air Force, and at the end of the 1940s, he was posted out to the Far East on Sunderland flying boats, and I'm really looking forward to going and having a look in Hangar 1, because there's one here. And this was the first book. It's called The Bother in Birmingham. Birmingham is a made-up country which is a bit like Burma and a bit like Borneo and a bit like some Far Eastern country. And the book's all about is a kind of typical kind of a bit like Biggles and all those kind of boys' own daring-do kind of adventures. There's a tiger, there's a Sunderland, there's a snake, you know, all this kind of thing, a time travel adventure. And that one, I guess, here's one of my dad's old, I'll put this all out so you can go and have a look. That's my dad's old flying map, silk map from when he was in Burma. One side is Burma and the other side is, I think, what used to be called Siam, which is Thailand, of course, today. So that was the first story, and I scribbled and wrote it. And I won't go into all the details, but I was lucky enough to win a prize from a small publisher and get it published. And so, again, the story could have finished there, but it went on. And one of the old chums of my father's, who I got in touch with, had been, in the 1950s, in the Cold War, he'd been in reconnaissance out in Germany. And I spent a long time talking with him, and I started getting another idea, because I was living in Germany, I still do live in Germany, in fact, about, well, we could have another story of the same boy going back and having another adventure of his grandpa, but this time in the Cold War situation in a country a bit like Germany. And then I've got another map here, and this is a European one from the Cold War. So there we have sort of Belgium and Luxembourg and Germany. And I came up with another kind of plot, this time set in the winter, this time involving the space race from the 1950s, and this one is planes are reconnaissance meteors, photo reconnaissance planes, and there's also a prototype lightning in the book as well. And so that's the second one, Trouble in Teutonia. And same boy, but there's a time travel dilemma in this one, because when Billy Boy goes back the second time, his grandpa was even younger, so it's set in time before the first one. And then finally, I'm going to stop soon. When I was very young, my dad was posted out into Aden, and this was in the early 60s, before the independence and before the British left. So I had some very early memories, mainly of the beach and the shark nets, and the camels and the goats in the street and that sort of thing. And this, of course, provided the setting for the final book in the kind of trilogy. And this is the kind of map that goes with that, which is Aden in the early 60s. And then this last one is the Al Eden emergency, set in a place rather like Aden. And this one features the Hawker Hunter, and also the transport plane, the Beverly. And I've tried to be accurate with the technical details, and I have had technical advice from my dad's friend when he was still with us. But it is fiction. I mean, it's escapist kind of adventure fiction. And yeah, so that's, for me, it was my way, I guess, of keeping my father, and not just my father, but the whole generation and their spirit alive, in that while I was writing these, it was very comforting to me, because I could remember something my father said. In fact, when the gentleman and the lady here were speaking, and the gentleman on Zoom, I could feel the kind of, it was like my parents were speaking, and I found that very comfortable when you remember something. So I was remembering all his ridiculous expressions that we thought were so funny at the time. What's he talking about? He'd always be talking in a very kind of military way. So that's all in the book, the way that he spoke as well. So that's a little bit about my stories and my wild imagination, and I haven't actually written one about Falcon Field, but I think being here today and hearing all these other stories, I think maybe I can go back and start on that. I'm going to be sitting around the corner, and all my bits and pieces that I've shown you will be there. If anyone would like a book, I'm offering them on sale, and I'll be signing them if you like, and I'd be delighted if one or two would like a copy. As I say, it's officially for 9 to 12, but I then say for 9 to 12-year-olds of all ages, with the 11 or 12-year-old in us all, reading the torch under the covers. And just as I think to end on, because I know everyone's hungry and I've babbled on for too long, I've got a little YouTube trailer which is only a minute or so long. But this one. That's the way.
It's loading.
Suspense, suspense.
Thank you, Susan. That was absolutely fantastic.
Just one little afterword. In the film, the hand holding the Sunderland model, that was my son when he was younger. And he isn't a pilot, but he's doing an apprenticeship to be an aircraft technician. So he'll be one of the men on the ground. So the aviation genes are still going in the family, which is great.
Fantastic.
Thank
Thank
you.
you ever so much. I hope that's inspiring some of the rest of you what you can do next.